to get your thoughts on the story of Twitch now going back and you starting it. What and maybe even the early days. So a quick overview for the room, because I'm sure many have heard some version of it, but the quick highlights of just what led to it. And then what do people get wrong about the story? And if we have any of the folks who are going to join us who may have remembered it differently than you, and they might even say you got it wrong, but would love to hear just the impetus for it to spark and remind everyone of how sometimes things have to go right and wrong to get this lightning in a bottle, and then we'll move on to what do people get wrong about the story, and then Noah and Eric and I will work on bringing some folks up.
Love that. Okay, so yeah, it was a very circuitous journey, and people have, I think, back in 2014 when we sold to Twitch, there was a lot of spotlight on it, but people have kind of forgotten that Twitch out of a different company. And so really the journey started in 2005. I'd started this company called Kiko with my friend Emmett Shear, who's a childhood friend of mine and then college friend. And Kiko was relatively uneventful or like forgettable, except for two things that happened for us. One was we got into the very first batch of Y Combinator, the seed fund for startups in 2005. So we got funding for our company. And then the second was that we ended up working on it for about a year. It was like Google Calendar, but except before Google Calendar. And then Google Calendar came out and crushed us. It was a better product in every way. And I'm, happy to admit that now in retrospect. And then what happened was we sold it on eBay. We sold our company for we had no idea what to do. We'd actually, there's some funny stories from back then where we almost had sold it to Yahoo, but they ghosted us. And then for lack of a better idea, we ended up listing the whole site on eBay. And it went for $258,100, which was phenomenal for us at the time because that was more than we had raised, in this kind of like very small angel round of $60,000. And it helped us convince us that we should keep going and like start another startup. And so by this time, a year had passed. It was 2006, and we went to Y Combinator founder Paul Graham's house. He was like, "Do you guys have another startup idea? I'd love to fund you for something new." And so Emmett and I went over to Paul's house and we pitched him this idea we had. And the idea was, it was like it was a website that would let you lay out your online content into a book and then print out the book or sell the book to your followers, which I think is actually a business idea that other people have subsequently gone on to try to start. And Paul, who was a prolific online author, and still is, was like, that idea sucks. I would never, the internet, the paper is like dead, and I would never use this. So like, what other ideas do you have? And Emmett and I kind of look at each other, and we've been kicking around this idea that we called Justin TV, which wasn't really a company idea. It was a idea to almost like a stunt, like an internet stunt. And the idea was to create a 24/7 live audio and video stream of our lives, well, really my life, to the internet, as almost like a new media format. And so, I mean, this is before there was like Periscope or Instagram Live. This was before Instagram, before Twitter even. So this is back in 2006. There wasn't really social media. So we thought, but the thought was like you could create a new kind of reality TV that was just like 24/7. It was almost like the Truman Show or Ed TV. There were a couple movies that had kind of covered this kind of concept. So we started talking about it. I was like, well, I have this idea, Paul, for this thing called Justin TV, where we'll just create a live 24/7 reality stream of our lives. And he's like, oh, interesting. Tell me more. And I started telling him, okay, you could have different types of people. Eventually, it could be not just my stream, but you could have different archetypes of people. You could have someone who's an aspiring musician, or someone who's a female executive at a company, or whatever. Someone who wants to be an actor in LA, and then everyone would just tune in to follow along the lives of these people. And so he was intrigued, and then what really sold it was one of his friends, who's also one of the founders of Y Combinator, this professor of computer science, Robert Morris, was there, and he said, Justin, I'll fund that just to see you make a fool of yourself. And so Paul and Robert just wrote us a check right there for 50 grand to start Justin TV.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's just for the lulz, to see the experiment happen and play out. And So we walked out there. We were like, I guess we're starting this as a company. Let's do it. And then what happened was we ended up saying, okay, we were in Boston at the time. That's where we started our first company. We relocated to San Francisco, drove across the country. We had sent an email to a bunch of friends of ours, like, hey, we're going to leave the East Coast. So, let's have one last rager in New York or whatever, and then we'll see you. And one of my friends from college, Michael Seibel, was like, I'll come with you guys. I'll come on this road trip with you. And he ended up coming out with it. So we piled into Emmett's Honda Civic, which was what the car Emmett had at the time was kind of like shitty Civic, and we had to throw out like half our stuff to fit Michael and his stuff, and then we drove out to San Francisco, and that's how we started the company. And then when we were there, Michael was so helpful. He started actually, he found us an apartment. He started set up a bank account so we could cash the check. And I was like, you should join this company as useful at all this like random administrative stuff. So you should just come and be the co-founder of this company. And at first he was like, no, but after a couple of weeks, he thought about it. He ended up flying back out and rejoining us. And then we recruited another co-founder, Kyle Vogt from MIT, who was a student at MIT who was going to help us build this hardware camera. And so that was our founding team. There were 4 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment. We were like, we're going to start this live streaming service about us, like, trying to build this startup. To it's kind of as a meta idea, I guess, and we're gonna we're basically these live video content creators on the internet before there was any live video content creation. And so fast forward 6 months, we hacked on this project. We kind of moved into this building in North Beach in San Francisco where all these other startups founders had moved in after us. So the founders of Reddit, my friend Steve from Reddit, the founders of Dropbox, the founders of Script, and all these other sites, they kind of moved into this almost like startup dorm. And we were like hacking on our project, and in about 6 months, we decided, okay, we're ready. We built this hardware prototype, and we were like ready to launch it. And then, March 19th, 2007, we launched it. The TLDR is like, it kind of blew up in the news. People were it was on empty. People were like, why would this guy want to stream his life to the internet? This is complete nonsense. It was like before influencers, right? So people were like just shocked. And I was on the Today Show and MTV and Good Morning America and all these other shows, and people came because they were fascinated. They were like, I want to see what this is all about. But then the content was terrible because it was like us live streaming. I would be walking around San Francisco, or I would be like, we would be on our computers or whatever. We'd be planning what content we want to make. So the content was like not actually that interesting. And so the retention rate was terrible of it. And in order to spice it up, viewers started, taking matters into their own hands. Like people would call the cops on us all the time. We got swatted multiple times. People would order pizzas to our house, like just nonstop. It was actually quite terrible. But what happened was, we kind of, after we saw what was happening and people were like really bored with our content, we realized we needed to do something different. And luckily, one segment of people wrote into us and they were like, how are you creating a live video stream on the internet right now? Like, how do you do this? And so we decided, okay, we're gonna open it up and create a platform that lets anyone broadcast live. And we kind of retooled for 6 months, and that was the story of how we like turned Justin TV into this live video platform, which was basically the site that turned into Twitch a couple of years later.
Oh my gosh, just so wild. Again, the things that go right and wrong. And brought up a couple folks, John, Alier, we've had a couple questions come in through Twitter. So for the group, anybody who's joined the room, this is Behind the Billions. And as much as the word billions is in the title, it's also meant to be a little ironic because we're talking more about the journey, the lessons where people get it wrong, the story that is often untold in building these companies that are, viewed as successful and well recognized, but really require a lot of misses along with a lot of wins on the journey. And we are chatting with Justin Kuhn, co-founder of Twitch, about that. And we started out talking about the personal side of things and his focus on on wellness and mindfulness as a result of going through a really intense time as a founder while the company was growing. And we are manning Twitter, womaning Twitter. So you can use hashtag BTB or DM me, and I'm keeping an eye on those. If you've got a question and want to be in the hand raise queue to come up, just raise your hand. And then as we have the opportunity to bring folks up throughout, we'll do that. And then we'll have some other people who were on the journey with Justin join us in a bit as well. So welcome, John, and then Alir, we'll get to you next.
Thanks so much, Kat. Appreciate it. Hey, Justin, I'm so glad you told the founding story and you talked about Justin TV, because that's where my question is going to go. You mentioned that you're doing all these creative things right now and you're creating content, and it made me think of how early Justin TV was, how prescient it was with the Truman Show and with Ed TV and those things that you mentioned. Do you think the time is right for something like that now? Do you want to revisit that idea? What do you think of that idea through the lens of today?
Well, I think if we were smarter with Justin TV, we would have thought of what was the Snapchat stories and Instagram stories. Because what we thought, which was right, the insight we had that was right, was that people are interested in other people. They're fundamentally interested in what other people are doing, how they're living. And that was something that I think was a really accurate core insight. But the problem was our implementation was terrible. The implementation was like you log on the site and you watch 1 minute of video for every 1 minute of video filmed. And John, you've been in media for a while, and you know that like in order to get 1 minute of video filmed, that's like good. That actually the audience will end up seeing. You're going to film 60 minutes of footage to cut down to that 1 minute to make it interesting. And so I think that the spiritual successor of Justin TV really is this kind of stories format on Instagram and Snapchat, where people can highlight their the few moments that happen of interest in their day, and you don't have to wait through the other 23 hours and 58 minutes.
Love that. Alir.
Thank you so much, Kat. Hey, Justin. Question for you. As entrepreneurs and founders, we connect ourselves to our companies in such a deep way. And I love your emotional honesty. And, a two-part question, which is, one, was there any regret in selling Twitch following the sale? And then to add to that, what were some of the emotional sort of, let's call it roller coasters in the next 1 to 2 years following the sale?
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe I'll start by just kind of telling a little bit about the background from how we got to Justin TV, the live video site, to Twitch, which was, it's kind of a long story, but the TLDR is in 2007 we launched Justin TV, a platform for anyone to broadcast live, and then we grew that to be like a top 250 website in the world. And we raised about $7 million in venture capital to do it, and we survived the 2008, 2009 recession. We were very scrappy. We did everything and anything to like reduce costs. We would rack servers ourselves. We didn't use AWS because it was too expensive. We like built our own server farm. We had a very small team. It was like 20 people by the time 2010, 2011 rolled around, and we just survived when a lot of other video sites died. And then we ended up deciding, like, what happened was the site flattened out. The traffic stopped growing, and we were like, well, something that's not growing on the internet is about to die because the internet's growing. So we've got a problem. And so we started brainstorming things to pivot to, like what else could we do? And we came up with these two concepts. My co-founder Emmett came up with this idea of the video game content. He was like, well, the only thing that I like as a user is watching StarCraft 2 videos. So why don't we make more of that, or get more of that on the site? And my other co-founder Michael was really like, he thought mobile video was going to be really big, and so he wanted to create something that was like, I guess, like kind of what TikTok is today. And so we ended up working on both of those ideas, and the video game concept kind of grew and grew and grew, and eventually we decided, hey, the future of the company is to work on this, and like we're going to pivot fully to the site that we call Twitch. And there was like a huge amount of emotional roller coasters along the way. I remember like we you talk about the sale and regret, like, well, like going up to the sale, we just, I remember the right before we actually sold the company, that year before, we tried to get secondary and like sell some shares at like a $200 million valuation. No investor wanted to buy them. You know, they thought that people watching video games was like a joke. People wouldn't be interested in it. It wasn't like something that was serious. It was like not going to be lasting. And so, you know, we couldn't even raise money. It was really hard to raise money for the business. And then, you know, we eventually, I think I tell some of these stories on YouTube in my recent YouTubes, but we got this offer from Google, which, you know, they kind of bid themselves up and up and up to up to $1 billion, and then that fell through. And so like we were like, oh my God, we just walked away from $1 billion, and then we got another offer from Yahoo at 1.5 billion, and then that fell through. And then we got this, finally did this deal with Amazon at $970 million. And so, you know, the whole journey was this like an incredible roller coaster. And then afterwards, you know, what was interesting was, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like there was just still, comparison was like still there. You know, I was like, it was great for like a couple months, like, oh, we sold this company, like kind of made in Silicon Valley now, but it was so easy to slip back into that mode of like, oh, but my friends have done it better. You know, that was something that I thought about a lot actually, because one of the things, actually, I see like Joe Gebbia from Airbnb is in the room, and like Airbnb, we were, you know, my co-founder Michael kind of helped mentor the Airbnb guys back in 2008, and we'd just seen them rise to this like stratospheric heights, right? And so I remember I would always like think, oh man, we did pretty well, but like the guys from Airbnb did so much better, you know. And so there was this element of comparison that like never went away even after we sold the company.
It's so interesting to think about that. You know, those decisions, the decision not to take the first offer, the decision, you know, to take the offer that follows. And I'd love to maybe double down on that, Justin, on what are some of the fork in the road moments, the decisions to do something or not to do something that had massive implications. This could be personal or professional. It can be about the business or people or an investor or a hire. But when you look back and you think that's one of those if not for moments, like if not for that decision, X wouldn't have happened. Or, you know, I'd love to hear that, because we don't know we're in those moments necessarily when we're in them.
Well, I think there was, I mean, there are so many of them, right? Like almost every instance that like led us down this path was something, or if it didn't happen, that like seemingly small things, it probably wouldn't have, you know, we wouldn't have been here. But like one, obviously, like Paul pushing us to start this company was like one big one. And then there's this other moment when we were pivoting from Justin TV to Twitch, when we almost didn't know how to pivot the company because we couldn't agree. The four co-founders of the company, we would just argue about what we should do. Like Emmett was really into Twitch, and then Michael was really into this app we called Social Cam. And we couldn't agree on what to do. And so we had this one conversation with my friend Matt Sanchez, who's the co-founder of Video Egg, and they had raised like $100 million and pivoted 5 times, and they were still alive at the time. And I was like, you know, Matt would know what to do, how we like should do this pivot. And he told us that he was like, don't throw away your existing business, which was, you know, Justin TV was making like $10 million in revenue at the time, so it's not nothing. It's like, you should write down your goals for each of these projects a priori, and like what you think success would be, and then you can use that to decide. Just work on both things, and then whatever works, you know, and hits your goals, you know, you can continue working on that and just focus on that. And that made the decision really easy, because I think thinking, you know, pivoting the company to gaming when not everyone was into gaming, you know, like half the team didn't really even like watching playing or watching video games. And so that was like a really hard decision to make, except when we set goals, we said, okay, if this is going to be big, it could be as big as GameTrailers.com, which was like the biggest gaming website at the time, video game website for video at the time. And that was like 10 million monthly active users. So if we said if we could get to 10 million MAU, that would be phenomenal, and that would be worth pivoting to. And so we could, you know, we backed that out as like 15% monthly growth for the first 6 months, and then for the first year, and then 10% monthly growth for the year after that. And so it made it really easy to pivot to Twitch, because we actually blew those goals out of the water in that first 6 months. And I think that was like a really critical framework for helping us decide what to pivot to, you know?
And, I think thinking about those for all of us on our journey looking back, it's just, can we get better at knowing when we're in those moments, so we, not so it stresses us out, but so we put the proper thoughtfulness and team and perspective around those decisions. And we've got a buddy of yours who's joined us up here, Steve. Welcome. And Linwood, we're going to come to you in just a second. But Steve, so stoked to have you on the stage. Please introduce yourself for the room. And I'd love to hear if there's any of this that Justin's sharing that you remember it differently.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve. So I think you may have covered the some of the early stories before I joined, but I don't know if Justin, you mentioned that I think the first video game streamed on Justin TV, and then ultimately Twitch was, I think, my Xbox when we were playing Call of Duty. We plugged it, like we couldn't think of anything to do that night. It was like a late night, and we ended up just like plugging your backpack directly into the Xbox.
I remember that. That was the first, you did stream the first video games to what became Twitch. The original streamer.
I got like a whole bunch of friends on Xbox from that, and that's what I used to use to watch DVDs. And then for like the next year or two, whenever I'd watch a DVD, I don't know if anybody remembers what a DVD is. It would like pop up on my TV. It'd be like, automatic butt is online. Just like that moment haunted me forever with all those randos.
You basically had everybody who was watching from, I think it was like a lot of people from Dig at the time who were just like would find new ways to harass me, but like signing up for, basically they all friend requested you and then just like left you alone after that.
Yeah, so that Xbox account is burned.
I'd love to hear from you guys about, who are some of the make or break people, someone, whether it was a key hire or investor or one of those people who just come into your universe, could be a life partner, anyone who comes in that really makes a difference from that point forward. I'm scrolling down, I see a lot of founders and CEOs of companies at various stages in the room. And a lot of the rooms these days on Clubhouse are talking about people and people topics and the right partners and the right hires, and when to know when it's time for someone to go to upgrade, and when to know when it's time to try to just beg the best to come join you. I'd love to hear you talk about the people side of the journey.
Well, one person who was very critical to Twitch's development, who often doesn't get enough credit from the outside the community, is much beloved inside the community, is Kevin Lin, who was our first COO at Justin TV. And so Kevin was such an amazing story. He was friends of ours from college, really close friends with Michael, our CEO. He's now the CEO of Y Combinator. And Michael basically was the business guy. So he had, like, when we were a 10-person company, he had all the responsibility around doing, the accounting and stuff like that. But he didn't actually know anything about accounting or taxes or anything. And so, I think there was one week when our taxes were due and we hadn't done any books for the whole year. And Michael was like, oh, holy shit, what do I do? So he called his friend Kevin, who's also in San Francisco. And he's like, hey, Kevin, can you come over before work? So at 7 a.m. in the morning to our office for this week. And every day this week, just help me figure out how to do our accounting and taxes. And Kevin, such a good friend, was like, okay, I'll do it. And so he started coming by early in the morning. And after that first 4 days in, Michael was like, we have to hire Kevin. This company will not exist if we don't hire Kevin, because I'm actually not doing all these things that we agreed to do. And so Michael was like, hang on one second. So Michael and I take Kevin to lunch at this place called Louisiana Fried Chicken, which used to be by the AT&T ballpark in Soma. And I'm like, Kevin, you just got to join this company. Like he was working at a juice startup at the time. We were like, you should just quit that company and join our company. When are you going to get to work with your friends? And I just like gave him this like massive sales pitch. And so he ended up joining, and he joined and became the COO of Justin TV. And then a couple of years later, when we were pivoting to Twitch, he actually liked the gaming content. Like him and Emmett were the real main advocates of the gaming content. And so Kevin ended up like being the one to like go and talk to all the different gaming broadcasters on YouTube and the other competitor sites. There was one called Own3D and one called Ustream. And he would go and ask them like, what is it going to take to get you to stream your content on Justin TV? And it was Justin TV at first, and then 6 months later we turned it into its own website, Twitch. And they would, they'd say like, "Oh, I want to get paid," or we almost died so many times that like I almost quit probably like every year. Like I was thinking like, oh man, this isn't working. I should just go quit and do something else. And really, what helped keep me going was the co-founders that we had were friends of mine, and I just didn't want to let people down. And so there was this motivation that was like keeping me there, probably to be with them and kind of finish what we started. But it was tough, and there were lots of different tough times. But the thing that happened was basically we were terrible at raising money. We were very bad at fundraising, and it was very hard for us to raise capital. So I remember, one story, the first time we did the best time we did it was probably like our Series A when we had launched Justin TV. This is before we even had turned it into a platform. And we were still doing our show, but we had all this hype from this media at the time. And I remember we were off, we were going down Sand Hill trying to pitch them on this future of like, live streaming personalities. And we had this one verbal offer from Redpoint. And they said they'd give us $1 million at a $5 million pre-money valuation. And we thought that was pretty good. At the time, valuations were pretty low. So that was pretty good. And then we had this whiteboard in our house/office. Like we all lived together still. And we had this whiteboard, and we wrote, we would just write like whatever meeting notes and stuff on. So we just wrote like 1 million on 5 Redpoint. And then we had this meeting with this other investor who we met through a friend who's an entrepreneur who we'd met serendipitously. So that was kind of like a lucky connection. And these guys were this firm, Alsop Louis Partners, and they came into our office for a meeting, and then they, we talked to them, told them to pitch. We're going to do this like live video ecosystem of streamers, and as they were walking out, they walked by that 1 million on 5 million, from Redpoint, like written on the whiteboard. And the following week, they gave us this term sheet that was like 2 million on a $10 million valuation. So it was pretty awesome. We'd like doubled our valuation from just, kind of tactically, like it was complete accident, but we like just had this, this competing offer just like written on the whiteboard there. But that was like the easiest it ever was. And after that, it only got harder and harder to fundraise. And we got to a certain point that was like when we got to, I remember like we raised a Series B, we were like an A1, like an extension to that round, and we were not really able to like raise it. We had to go back to our same investor. We tried to raise it from other investors, but no one was willing to fund the company. So our existing investors stepped up, and Tim Draper joined the round. He gave us almost $1 million, and then we then the GFC started happening. Like Lehman went bankrupt, and we were like, oh shit, we're not going to be able to raise any more money. And so to your earlier question, we started being like super scrappy. Well, we were always scrappy, but we started being like really, really scrappy. We just put ads everywhere on the site. Like we put ads like every place on the site, like on the static pages, like on the 404 page, like when you would type in the wrong URL, there was like an ad there on that page. Like
Crafty.
we just every month, the founders and we would all meet, and we would make a list of every way that we could save money in the company.
I thought you were going to say you were going to meet and decide where you could put more ads.
We did. No. Okay. So we made a list. We
What?
every month we would be like, where can we make more money, and where can we where can we save money? And the making more money was always finding new places to put like shoehorn ads in. Like we would make like auto pay ads that would happen on the front page, or like ads on the directory. I mean, it was like shameful, you know. But we also like figured out how to reduce cost. Like we would just, you know, we would it actually led to a lot of infrastructure improvements in like how we stored and distributed video. But we just, you know, it was ruthless. And the result of that was we went from like 300,000 in monthly revenue to like $1 million in monthly revenue under a year. You know, we had, and that was something that we'd never thought was possible. But we had like got to cash flow break even in like a year after the GFC, you know, because we were just so relentless about it.
Yeah, just a follow up. I just want to say one thing. The reason I asked that question is I think a lot of people get enamored with raising money and don't realize how hard it is and how distracting it is from your core business. And there's a lot of us that are not really good at raising money because we have in our mind where we want to go with our business. And I think sometimes it's good to like let people understand that so that they can know that the grind may be even more valuable than raising more money.
Yeah.
For sure. There's a lot of discipline that comes from not raising money.
Hey, Justin, how many times would you estimate how many pitches you've done and how many term sheets you've gotten over the years?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've probably done to VCs, like the actual like, you know, VCs firms, not including angel investors. I think I've done 50 to 100 pitches. And and then in terms of term sheets that we've done for like all the different businesses that I've ever had, it's probably like 7, right? And we've raised like $500 million or something like that now, you know. And so it's, yeah, you have to like, there's a lesson in there somewhere, which is just that like you need to be persistent, and like it's a funnel, right? You can't take rejection personally in the fundraising game of it. And like,
oh, dude, I take it extremely personally. So my numbers are probably about the same. It's like 100 plus pitches and a handful of term sheets, and I remember every one of them.
well, I remember. Can I tell the story of your 2017 round?
The Series C, yeah, I think it's a great story.
Yeah. So Steve, you know, for those of you who don't know, Steve is the founder and CEO of Reddit, and don't know it, you know, it's pretty much the biggest thing ever. And I remember in 2017 we were having beers in San Francisco, and I was like, "You should come on vacation with us." We were going to go to Ibiza for vacation, right? And I was like trying to convince you to come, and you were like, "No, I got to do this fundraise for this, you know, for Reddit. We have to raise more money." And I was like, "That." And then you were telling me that all these VCs were giving you the runaround on valuation, and they were like,
yeah, everybody likes this thing about everybody wanted to see our numbers, right? So everybody would be really, really sweet, you know, so they could just see what was going on.
yeah, they were, and they, you know, they wanted to invest, but they wanted like a, you know, a sub whatever valuation that you wanted. They wanted like 60% of that or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was just, you know, it was kind of bullshit because, you know, Reddit, you were one of the top 10 websites in the world at the time, right? Or at least in the US. And I remember being like, why do you need a VC? Like, you don't need VCs. You don't need, they're not going to tell you anything. VCs are there to tell you how to like grow your company or whatever, but they can't tell you shit. You're already like a huge website, and you should just go directly to like other capital sources, you know, family offices, and, you know, have some friends try to raise an SPV for you. And so, you know, I was like, okay, if I help you raise the round, you're going to come on vacation with us, right? And you know, started sending some texts right then, and then like 2 weeks later, you know, met your lead investors, you know, through some of those connections, and then they made that investment right then, right? Like it was a non-traditional investor.
Yeah, you introduced us. Well, so I remember having that dinner with you. I was complaining about the process, and it was just, you know, it's just dragging on and on. And so you were like, you should just go straight to the LPs. And I was like, okay, I'll think about doing that. And I was like, I remember thinking that's a very kind of Justin thing to, it's like a very Justin thing to say. It was good advice. but I wasn't sure if I was going to do it. And the next day you called me, you're like, hey, you know what? Let me just talk to LPs. And so, yeah, you made some calls and made that intro. And actually it was like a kind of a life-changing intro, because we got to go on that trip, which was super fun. And then two, they're among, I think, my favorite investors. So thank you for that. And, I think just to kind of respond to what I was saying, there's a lot of downs before you get that, before you finally get that win.
How do you guys think about navigating those downs? I mean, Justin, you mentioned you almost quit every year, and there were co-founders and other people you didn't want to let down. I'd love to hear just any tips or something you didn't do well to navigate the downs that you now feel like you're more equipped to. And then we'll get to you, Will, and Kimala and Krista. But would love to hear you guys kind of riff on that.
Well, I don't think I had very good mechanisms of doing that when I was younger, and that would be, I would have very crippling anxiety about the future of the company, or how I felt like things were going, or like things that I should have done in the past that maybe, I didn't do. And so like the company wasn't doing well now. I was constantly in my own head about that. And then the way that I got out of it was I would just like disconnect through, I try to distract myself. I was not very good at being present with my emotions. So I would distract myself. And I remember I would binge watch like TV. I'd watch like a whole season of TV, in like 2 days or 3 days after work. Or I would just get completely shit-faced and drink. I got my 10,000 hours in 10,000 drinks. Like Steve can attest to that.
Yes, I can. Unfortunately, I was probably right there with you many of those times. So one thing that I learned over the years is, if you have enough downs, especially at work, you start to realize that, they're only temporary. And so then I was feeling down, and it's like, but and every time I've been in a low point, I've come out of it. And it's a low point. There's a lot. If I look forward, there's probably a bunch more high points in front of me. Usually that thought process and a good night's sleep, and then it's like, okay, we're back. We're back in action. And I've been playing that game with myself for 10 years now.
Yeah, it reminds me, my husband has been in the operating side of venture-backed startups for quite some time, and now is on the venture side. But more importantly, he's an ultra endurance athlete and runs 100-mile races and rode across the Atlantic Ocean. And so he's just learned to deal with some stuff. And he just always says, this too shall pass. Like the good's not going to last forever, and the bad isn't going to last forever. And so stay humble when things are really dope, and don't get too worn down when things are incredibly tough. Will.
Hi guys, I'm Will. Thanks so much for bringing me up to the stage. Justin,
Yeah.
I loved hearing you talk about Kevin Lynn, who's actually a good friend of mine, and had never heard the story from somebody else as to how he joined the team. And it was clear that, there are those moments of serendipity when we meet somebody when it's just like the right fit. Kevin was there early morning, was like, we got to hire this dude. And I know Kevin, he's just like a breath of fresh air and this kind of like bright shining light. But my question is about the flip side of that coin. Do you have a litmus test, or are there points at which you realize, okay, there's a relationship, there's a personnel situation that isn't working out? How do you get out of that situation? How much time do you time and energy do you expend trying to correct or fix a situation or adjust somebody versus just deciding to say, hey, this is not working and we need to move this person out of the organization? And I guess I'd pose the same question to Steve as well at Reddit. I'm always curious as to, like, as you're building these bigger and bigger and bigger hives and have all these more and more capable and functional workers, sometimes just the wrong cog in the machine can really foul the whole thing up. And so I'm just curious if you have like those kind of litmus tests of like, okay, this is definitely never going to work, or this is a solvable situation. And then how do you deal with those situations when somebody is not a, a productive member of the team any longer, and how do you remove them, or do you just delegate?
Well,
Tell someone else to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a very unsavory part. I mean, it's a skill unto itself, is that like how to let somebody go, how to my father runs a little private school. He's the headmaster of a school in New England, and he's had to let like really good, lovely people go who just aren't a good fit on the faculty, and it's become an art form for him over the years to, and he somehow makes it like a win-win. Like, this is in your best interest. I'm helping you out. I'm doing you a favor.
That's
by
right.
this is not your highest function, highest calling. You're a great guy, but you're just not a history teacher, Mark. Like.
So many thoughts on that, but Justin and Steve, please.
Well, Steve, I'm sure, has a better answer than me, so I'll just go first quickly. For me, I think what's really important is having feedback mechanisms and then clear agreements. And so feedback mechanisms are like, whether it's one-on-ones or team meetings with your team or whatever it is, you have to have mechanisms where you are giving them clear feedback on what is going well and what needs to change. And that's something I did not know when I was like a young manager, like or
size or whatever. But kind of